The chapel smelled faintly of lilies, their sweetness clashing with the hollow ache in my chest. I stood beside Marcus's casket, fingers brushing the polished wood, searching for warmth that was no longer there. Friends from Asheville and co-workers who had admired his craftsmanship came to pay respects, their hands gripping mine, their words fragments I could barely hold on to. Through the blur of embraces and murmured prayers, I saw my father. Raymond stood apart, shoulders squared, face carved from stone. He offered no comfort, no gentle word. When our eyes met, his nod was curt, a gesture of obligation rather than grief. He had never approved of Marcus, and today was no different. The pastor's voice rose, filling the chapel with stories of Marcus's generosity, his laughter, the home he built with his own hands. I wanted to sink into those words, to remember him not in death but in the life he poured into every beam and nail. My Aunt Marta rested a hand on my back, steadying me when my knees threatened to give. After the service, outside in the cold mountain air, I watched mourners drift away in small groups. My father lingered near the church steps, his voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. Marcus never should have claimed that land. It's Callaway property, built his fancy house like it was his to give. I froze, breath caught in my throat, even in death. Marcus was not spared my father's bitterness. Marta's eyes flickered to mine. A warning. But I said nothing. The moment was not for battles. I walked to the car, the weight of my father's words pressing against the grief already splitting me open, knowing they were only the beginning. When my father's words echoed in my mind, I turned to memory, to the place Marcus and I had built together. The house wasn't just lumber and stone on a patch of Carolina soil, it was his devotion made solid. I still see him at the drafting table, sleeves rolled up, pencil behind his ear. He would sketch until midnight, adjusting lines, measuring again, always asking how I moved through a room. "The counters should be a little lower," he said once, tapping the page. "You shouldn't need a step stool to reach the top shelf." I laughed, teasing him for fussing over inches, but secretly I loved the way he noticed details most people overlooked. For Marta, he designed wide doorways and a gentle ramp leading to the porch so she could come without feeling like a burden. He even planned a smaller kitchenette for her at the back of the house, where she could brew tea without asking. "Everyone deserves independence," he told me, his voice quiet but firm. We chose beams of reclaimed Carolina pine from an old barn outside Hendersonville. Marcus said wood with a past carried strength. I remember the day the beams arrived, their grain deep and weathered, and how he lifted one to his shoulder like it weighed nothing, grinning at me as if to say, "This is for us." Every choice-mattered cypress floors warm under bare feet, windows that caught the Blue Ridge morning light, a porch wide enough for rocking chairs and long conversations. It wasn't grandeur, it was sanctuary. And more than that, it was a declaration. With each nail Marcus hammered, he pushed back against my father's shadow, proving we could build a life without his grip. The house was not just walls, but proof of freedom, even now. I can almost hear Marcus whispering as he locked the front door for the first time. "This is ours. Elowin. No one can take it from you." But as I stood in the quiet after the funeral, my father's mutter still in my ears, I felt the first cracks of doubt pressing against that promise. My father liked to remind me that he raised me alone, as though the fact gave him permanent rights over my life. When my mother died in a car accident, I was only 12, lost in grief and confusion. He stepped in with rules instead of comfort, structure instead of softness. At first, I mistook it for strength. Only later did I realize it was control disguised as care. Every decision had to pass through him. If I wanted to join a school trip, he questioned the cost. If I talked about college, he dismissed it as unnecessary, telling me I'd be better off working in his shop. Even after I became a hospice administrator, a role that gave me purpose. He belittled it. You push papers, he scoffed. Not real work. You'll never make money that way. The truth was, money had always been his wound. When I was in college, he poured most of his savings into an auto parts franchise, convinced it would make him wealthy. The business folded within 2 years, leaving him with debts and a bitterness that seeped into everything. From then on, he eyed my stability with envy, as if my modest salary and careful savings had been stolen from him. Marcus only made things worse in his eyes. My father called him a dreamer, sneering at the house plans he drafted on the kitchen table. Fairy tales, he muttered. You can't build a future with pencils and good intentions. But Marcus proved him wrong with every beam he raised, with every corner of that house that stood strong against the mountain wind. Still, Raymond never let go of the idea that what I had was somehow owed to him. He carried his failures like a badge, expecting me to shoulder them too, and standing at Marcus's funeral, hearing him mutter about the land, I understood that his resentment hadn't faded, it had only sharpened with time, waiting for a moment to strike. By the time Marta and I pulled into the driveway, the sky above the Blue Ridge was already dimming, streaked with the last light of day. My body ached with the weight of grief and ceremony, every step slower than the last. All I wanted was silence, the kind that comes when walls know your sorrow and keep it safe. But as I stepped out of the car, I noticed a glow spilling through the curtains. A lamp was on in the living room. My breath caught. Marta frowned, wheeling closer to me on the gravel. "Did you leave something running?" she asked. I shook my head. I had checked every switch before the service. The front door gave under my hand. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cologne I recognized too well. My father sat in Marcus's chair, one leg crossed, his suitcase leaning against the wall. The television hummed in the background, half a sports broadcast, half static. It was as if he had lived there for years. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply glanced at me, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You're late," he said. "I've already moved your belongings to a small house out in the countryside. This place is mine now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Marta gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But I stood rooted. My father's words cut with the same coldness he'd wielded all my life. Yet underneath them I heard desperation. He was staking a claim on the one thing he thought I couldn't live without. And then, without meaning to, I laughed. It wasn't loud, not even sharp, just a quiet sound, low and steady. His eyes narrowed, unsettled, as if I knew something he did not. In truth, I did. Marcus had made sure of it. I crossed the room, brushing my hand across the beam Marcus had installed with such care. "This house," I said softly, "will never belong to you." My father stiffened, but I turned away before his reply could sting. Inside, I could already feel Marcus's foresight stirring to life, and I knew this battle would not play out the way my father expected. I found him still in the living room after Marta had gone to bed, his suitcase half open, shirts spilling onto the floor as if to declare his arrival permanent. I wanted to avoid the fight, to hold my grief close and untouched, but my father had never been a man to leave silence alone. "You should thank me," he began, voice steady in that dangerous way it always was when he thought himself reasonable. "I'm stepping in to make sure this place doesn't go to waste. A woman alone can't manage something like this. You'll see soon enough." I folded my arms, my body trembling not from fear, but from the rising anger I could no longer swallow. "This is my home. Dad, Marcus and I built it together." He scoffed. "Your home. Don't make me laugh. This land has been in the Callaway line for generations. My grandfather worked this soil. It belongs to me, and by extension, to you, but only if I allow it. As head of the family, I decide The words struck like an echo of my childhood. Every curfew, every restriction, every reminder that my life was never my own. But I wasn't 12 anymore, and Marcus had freed me from that weight the day he pressed the deed into my hands. "You're lying," I said evenly. "Marcus purchased this lot outright. The deed is in my name. You know it, even if you won't admit it." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease. "Still," he pressed on, "you wouldn't have any of this if not for me. Don't forget who fed you, clothed you, kept you alive when your mother was gone. You owe me." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "What I owe you is the truth this home was built on Marcus's vision, not your debts. And it will never carry your name." The room went still. His face flushed, and his hand gripped the arm of Marcus's chair so tightly the veins stood out. Then he shoved himself up, snatched his suitcase, and spat. "We'll see about that. You think you're clever, but I'll prove you wrong." The door slammed behind him, the echo rattling through the beams Marcus had chosen with care. I stood in the silence he left behind, heart pounding, knowing he wouldn't let the matter rest and that his next move would cut deeper. Sleep was impossible after my father stormed out. I lay awake, staring at the beams above my bed, tracing their dark lines until memory overtook me. Marcus's voice returned, calm and certain, as if he had known this moment would come. It had been 3 years earlier, on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. My father had stopped by uninvited, standing in the half-finished kitchen with his arms crossed, calling Marcus's plans a waste of time. He said no house could last when it was built on sentiment, and that one day I'd come crawling back to him when everything fell apart. Marcus hadn't argued, but I'd seen the look in his eyes, quiet calculation, the same look he wore when measuring lumber before a cut. That night, after my father left, Marcus took my hand and said, "We need to see someone, not because I doubt us, but because I know him." Within a week, he had arranged a meeting with a lawyer in town. I remembered sitting in that office, the smell of paper and ink filling the air, while Marcus asked precise questions about deeds, trusts, and inheritance. He didn't raise his voice, didn't speak of my father by name, but every word was meant to guard me from the shadow I had grown under. The lawyer explained the process carefully. The deed would be placed solely in my name. A living trust would secure the property against any outside claims. It was meticulous, airtight. At the time, I thought Marcus was being overly cautious. He only smiled, saying, "It's not caution, Elowen. It's love." Now, lying in the stillness of the house he built, I felt the weight of his foresight. Marcus hadn't just left me a roof and walls. He left me protection, a fortress crafted out of trust and paperwork as much as pine beams and cypress floors. Tears slid quietly down my face, not from sorrow this time, but from the fierce gratitude of knowing he had seen the battle long before I did. Even in death, he had stood between me and my father, leaving me not only a home, but the dignity of keeping it. The summons arrived 2 weeks later, crisp paper folded in a way that carried my father's fingerprints without his touch. He had filed a legal claim, asserting the land beneath my house was Callaway property, passed through generations, and unlawfully taken by Marcus. For a moment, the weight of it pressed against my chest, but then I remembered Marcus's voice in that lawyer's office, steady as stone, its air tight, Elowen. At the courthouse in Asheville, I sat beside my attorney, a woman named Clara Jensen, whose calm presence steadied me. My father stood across the room, shoulders square, lips pressed thin, as if he were a man cheated out of a rightful inheritance. He spoke of his grandfather, of family soil tilled with Callaway hands, of entitlement rooted deeper than deeds. Clara let him finish before opening a folder thick with records. "Your Honor," she began, sliding papers across the bench. The lot in question was purchased by Marcus Price from Samuel Littleton, a private seller, 15 years ago. The deed is clear. No Callaway ownership has ever been recorded. The judge examined the documents, nodding once. My father's jaw twitched. Still, he tried again, claiming Marcus only used his name while intending to keep the property in the family. That was when Clara produced the trust papers. Heavy, stamped, and unshakable. They confirmed what Marcus had arranged. The property was secured solely in my name, protected against any outside claim. I watched the color drain from my father's face, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He had come to strip me of my home, but the foundation Marcus laid wood, stone, and law alike held firm. When the session adjourned, my father brushed past me without a word, his silence louder than all his threats. I knew then that the fight wasn't over, only that his defeat had cut him deeper than he could bear to show. In the weeks that followed the hearing, whispers traveled faster than mountain wind. Asheville wasn't a big city, and news of my father's failed claims spread through church pews, barber shops, and diner counters. Everywhere I went, eyes followed me, not with pity this time, but with something closer to quiet recognition. People had seen Raymond Callaway for what he was, and they no longer looked away. Old stories began to resurface. A mechanic he'd owed money to years back spoke of unpaid bills. An old neighbor recalled the poker games that ended with slammed doors and debts never settled. Even the failed auto parts franchise was spoken of again, the way he had convinced friends to invest and left them empty-handed. His image, once guarded by bluster, cracked under the weight of truth. For me, the gossip was background noise. The real weight sat heavy on my chest until one afternoon I drove out to the cemetery on the edge of town. The ground was soft from spring rain, the air smelling faintly of pine. I knelt by my mother's grave, tracing her name with my fingers as I used to do when I was younger and desperate for answers. "Mom," I whispered. He tried to take it all again, but Marcus made sure he couldn't. The words trembled, not from fear, but from release. I thought of the generations of Callaways before me, men who held power through control, through taking instead of giving. My father was only the latest link in that chain, but as I stood there, the stone cool beneath my hand, I felt the certainty rise inside me. The cycle ended here. I would not pass down bitterness disguised as duty. Whatever future I carved would be mine, free of his shadow, and with that vow settled deep in my chest, I turned back toward town, ready to make a choice Marcus had once hinted at, but I had resisted until now. The house grew quiet after the trial, but the silence was no longer comforting. Every room echoed with my father's intrusion. His shadow pressed into the corners like a stain I couldn't scrub away. Even Marcus's touch, strong in the beams and floors, felt tangled with memories of my father's demands. I realized then that the home we built for freedom had been claimed by grief and conflict. So I made the hardest choice. I listed the house for sale. The process moved faster than I expected. Young buyers drawn to the mountain views and the wide porches Marcus had designed with such care. Signing the papers felt like closing a door on more than wood and stone. It was closing a chapter I no longer needed to carry. With the proceeds, along with Marcus's life insurance, I bought a restored brick condo in downtown Asheville, overlooking the French Broad River. The building was old but solid, with tall windows that filled the rooms with light. It wasn't the dream house Marcus had built, but it was a place untouched by my father's bitterness. A place that could be mine alone. Before leaving, I salvaged 2 of the pine beams Marcus had lifted onto his shoulder the day they were delivered. I had them cut, sanded, and shaped into a bookshelf. When it was finished, I ran my hand along the smooth grain and felt as if Marcus's strength still lived inside the wood. The bookshelf stood in my new living room, filled with photo albums, cookbooks, and Marta's favorite novels. It reminded me that leaving the house didn't mean leaving Marcus behind. It meant carrying the best of him into a life where my father's shadow could not follow. Word of my father's failed claim lingered longer than he did. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid his glare. Men he had played cards with at the VFW whispered about his debts, shaking their heads at the pride that had undone him. His phone calls stopped, his visits ceased, and eventually his name was spoken only as a caution, not as kin. From my balcony downtown, I watched the French Broad shimmer in the afternoon sun, the water moving steady and sure. Life had slowed into a rhythm I hadn't known in years, coffee with Marta in the mornings, long walks through the historic district, evenings reading by the bookshelf Marcus had left me in spirit. The condo didn't carry his handprints on every beam, but it carried his foresight, his care, his refusal to let my father's shadow win. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at the door, expecting a knock, a demand, another intrusion, but none came. Marcus had secured our home, and with it, my dignity. My father's power had always been built on fear and guilt, and when those crumbled, there was nothing left but the hollow echo of his voice in rooms he would never enter again. On the balcony, I planted a dogwood tree in a large clay pot, its branches thin and fragile at first. It was native to these mountains, a tree that bent with storms but bloomed brighter each spring. As the first blossoms opened, pale and soft against the brick, I felt something settle inside me, a peace that was mine, unclaimed and unbroken. This house was never his to claim it was always ours, built on love, not control,